or else you don't complete the puzzle. So here's a simple definition from Biblical Doctrine. Quote, with the priestly covenant of Numbers 25, God promised a perpetual priesthood in the line of Phinehas that would continue all the way through the Lord's earthly millennial temple. End quote. And so this covenant deals in part with representation. Representation. Now, that's a key idea. So that's what a priest does, after all. They represent someone. He represents someone else before another. And so this covenant deals fundamentally with representation. What I want us to do in the time we have is look really at the interpretation of the priestly covenant. In other words, where is it taught and what does it mean? And then the institution of the priestly covenant. And what we mean by this is really the fulfillment of it. When does it come about in its fullness? And then the implications of the priestly covenant. Why is this significant? What can we learn from it? In an implication. So that's what we want to do. First, let's consider interpretation of the priestly covenant. What are the passages? And really, there are a number of passages, but there's three main passages that you should just know and jot down related to this covenant. And it's in Numbers 25. That's probably the most important because that's where it's first given. Numbers 25. Then Jeremiah 33. It comes up again with the other covenants of promise. We actually looked at that passage briefly in our very first session, but it's set alongside the other covenants of promise in Jeremiah 33. And then finally, really, Ezekiel 40 to 48 makes reference to it a number of times, but especially in chapter 44. So Numbers 25, Jeremiah 33, Ezekiel 44. There's other places that are significant for it, but those are the key ones. So first, let's consider Numbers 25 and really the establishment of this covenant in Numbers 25. And just to refresh your memory, Numbers, you have Israel in large part wandering in the wilderness. You got this generation, and I like to say this is kind of a dated illustration, but the book of Numbers is like Israel in screensaver mode. If you remember the screensavers that would like bounce along the screen, and you always would wonder, like, is it ever going to hit the corner just perfectly and just dink? And what would happen? Would the universe implode? Because it would never quite hit exactly. It would just get like dink, and then it would go. You're like, ah! So that's what Israel's like. And just think of that corner as like the promised land and getting into Canaan. And Israel's like bouncing around. You're like, oh, wait, they're super close. And they go and they keep wandering until that whole generation is wiped out. Well, of course, while they're wandering in the wilderness, there's this interchange between Balak and Balaam, and Balak wants to curse Israel, and so he hires this pagan prophet, Balaam, to curse Israel. And yet, Balaam can't do it. He can only bless Israel. It goes back to the Abrahamic covenant, actually. I'll bless those who bless you, I'll curse those who curse you. And so, God won't allow him to curse Israel. And so, he ends up giving these various prophecies about the future, and Israel's future, specifically Israel's Messiah. And so there's these great prophecies about Israel's Messiah and Israel's future. And so Balak fails in trying to go after Israel through cursing. So, but Balaam still wants to get paid. So he's like, okay, I can't curse Israel, but I know a way that we can work around, even though I can't curse Israel. If they commit idolatry, then God will punish them. And so here's a plan to get them to commit idolatry. Let's get the Moabite women, and they can intermarry them, and they'll follow the idolatry of the Moabites. And then God will judge them because they're in a covenant relationship. And so that's the plan, essentially. And so you have this moment of apostasy in Israel's history where they start intermarrying and they commit idolatry, and so God is going to start punishing them for that. So this is right after the Balaam prophecies, and this is now leading into their sin. And so we pick it up in chapter 25 of Numbers, verse 1. It says, while Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel yoked himself to Baal of Peor, and the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Israel. And Yahweh said to Moses, take all the chiefs of the people and hang them in the sun before Yahweh, that the fierce anger of Yahweh may turn away from Israel. And Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of you kill those of his men who have yoked themselves to Baal of Peor. And behold, one of the people of Israel came and brought a Midianite woman to his family in the sight of Moses and in the sight of the whole congregation of the people of Israel, while they were weeping in the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose and left the congregation and took a spear in his hand and went after the man of Israel into the chamber and pierced both of them, the man of Israel and the woman, through her belly. Thus the plague on the people of Israel was stopped. Nevertheless, those who died by the plague were 24,000. And so the context of this covenant is national apostasy by Israel. And they are intermarrying, they are having sexual relations with the Moabite women, and in this one instance, there is an Israelite man and a Moabite woman, and it's some think that what's happening, what they're doing is taking place in their personal tent. Some think it's actually happening in the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, and that's something to sort out. But it's certainly in the context there, he's mentioning the tent of meeting. And so either way, what happens is Phinehas, in zeal for the righteousness of God and his holiness, takes a spear, and so you can imagine what's happening. They are committing sexual immorality, and Phinehas walks in and spears them both through and kills them. And it's this incredible act of zeal, and it stops the plague because of his zeal for righteousness. Whoa, this is intense. And so, in light of that, we then see God make a covenant with Phinehas and his descendants. So verse 10, and Yahweh said to Moses, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the people of Israel, in that he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not consume the people of Israel in my jealousy. Therefore say, behold, I give to him my covenant of peace, and it shall be to him and to his descendants after him the covenant of a perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the people of Israel. And so here we are introduced to the priestly covenant, or the Phinehas covenant. It reminds us about the purity of our worship, because that's the context it comes in. It reminds us a lesson about faithfulness to the Lord, because Phinehas is one of the few faithful priests who is rewarded by the Lord for his faithfulness in a time of apostasy. It also shows the importance of Israel as a witness nation. I mean, they're going off into idolatry and intermarrying with the other nation, and yet here's Phinehas' zeal to keep that separation that God intends for his witness nation. But we also can note the nature of this covenant in verses 12 and 13. In verse 12, we see it's unilateral. It means God makes it himself. Behold, I give to him my covenant of peace. And that covenant of peace language is language used for the other covenants of promise. And then it's also an unconditional covenant. It is to him and his descendants after him, the covenant of a perpetual priesthood. So it's going to be ongoing. God is going to complete it regardless. So already we are starting to see that this covenant we're having hints that it's distinct from the Mosaic covenant that we looked at last time. Just in the language used, it's going to be ongoing. It will be a covenant of peace. And so it's made with, who's it made with? It's made with Phinehas and with his descendants. Phinehas is the grandson of Aaron, and he's the son of Eleazar. We see, now we need to go to 1 Chronicles for a moment to see how his line plays out, his lineage. In 1 Chronicles 6, And when you get there, just go like this with your Bible, and you can just blow off the dust of this section. I mean, this is like, if ever there was a section people just skip over, it's the beginning of First Chronicles, because it's just like genealogy after genealogy after genealogy. But this is why you got to read it, because you miss stuff like this. Also, another argument why this is the forgotten covenant, because we don't read that. Okay, yeah. So anyway, First Chronicles 6, verse 50. First Chronicles 6, verse 50 says, "These are the sons of Aaron: Eleazar his son, Phinehas his son, Abishua his son, Buki his son, Uzi his son, Zerahiah his son, Marioth his son, Amariah his son, Ahitub his son, Zadok his son, Ahimaaz his son." So we have the list here, and notice especially Zadok listed in this genealogy. Paul Henneberry writes this: "The descendants of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, include Zadok, who is identified as of the sons of Eleazar in 1 Chronicles 24, verse 3. During the attempted usurpation of the throne by Adonijah in 1 Kings 1, Abiathar deserted David. The aged king responded with having Abiathar removed from the priesthood, thus ensuring that Zadok's line, the descendants of Phinehas, kept the high priesthood. This becomes important when we get to Ezekiel." Okay, so now you need to turn to Ezekiel. Ezekiel. So Ezekiel 44. Ezekiel 44. Of course, this is a context. These chapters, 40 to 48, describe a temple that has never been built. It is bigger than any of the other temples, and it's in the context of a regenerate Israel who's been restored in the kingdom. And so this is what we call the millennial temple of the Messiah. And so some just like, we don't know what to do with this. This must be figurative. It must be fulfilled somehow in the church or something like that. But why so much detail here? Why so much precision about this temple if it's simply metaphorical? So it's a physical temple. There's more places than just Ezekiel 40 to 48 that describe this future temple. But we see the priests in this temple. In 44, verse, 10, pick it up in verse 10. Or actually, let's pick it up in verse 9. "Thus says Lord Yahweh, no foreigner, uncircumcised in heart and flesh, of all the foreigners who are among the people of Israel shall enter my sanctuary. But the Levites who went far from me, going astray from me after their idols, when Israel went astray, shall bear their punishment." Like, what is that about? Well, that's our passage in Numbers 25. "They shall be ministers in my sanctuary, having oversight at the gates of the temple and ministering in the temple. They shall slaughter the burnt offering and the sacrifice for the people, and they shall stand before the people to minister to them. Because they ministered to them before their idols and became a stumbling block of iniquity to the house of Israel. Therefore, I have sworn concerning them, declares Lord Yahweh, that they shall bear their punishment. They shall not come near to me to serve me as priest, nor come near any of my holy things and the things that are most holy. But they shall bear their shame and the abominations that they have committed. Yet I will appoint them to keep charge of the temple, to do all its service and all that is to be done in it. But the Levitical priests, the sons of Zadok," so now he's separating just from the general Levitical priests, specifically the priests of Zadok, or the sons of Zadok, "who kept the charge of my sanctuary when the people of Israel went astray from me, shall come near to me to minister to me. And they shall stand before me to offer the fat and the blood, declares Lord Yahweh. They shall enter my sanctuary, and they shall approach my table to minister to me, and they shall keep my charge. When they enter the gates of the inner court, they shall wear linen garments. They shall have nothing of wool on them, while they minister at the gates of the inner court and within. They shall have linen turbans on their heads and linen undergarments around their waists. They shall not bind themselves with anything that causes sweat. And when they go out into the outer court to the people, they shall put off the garments in which they have been ministering and lay them in the holy chambers. And they shall put on other garments, lest they transmit holiness to the people with their garments. They shall not shave their heads or let their locks grow long. They shall surely trim the hair of their heads. No priest shall drink wine when he enters the inner court. They shall not marry a widow or a divorced woman, but only virgins of the offspring of the house of Israel, or a widow who is the widow of a priest. They shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the common, and show them how to distinguish between the clean, unclean and the clean. In a dispute, they shall act as judges, and they shall judge it according to my judgments. They shall keep my laws and my statutes in all my appointed feasts, and they shall keep my Sabbaths holy. They shall not defile themselves by going near a dead person. However, for father or mother, or for son or daughter, for brother or unmarried sister, they may defile themselves. After he has become clean, they shall count 7 days for him, and on the day that he goes into the holy place, into the inner court to minister in the holy place, he shall offer his sin offering, declares Lord Yahweh. This shall be their inheritance. I am their inheritance, and you shall give them no possession in Israel. I am their possession. They shall eat the grain offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering, and every devoted thing in Israel shall be theirs. And the first of all their first fruits of all kinds, and every offering of all kinds from all your offerings shall belong to the priest. You shall also give to the priest the first of your dough, that a blessing may rest on your house. The priest shall not eat of anything, whether bird or beast, that has died of itself or is torn by wild animals. So this is the longer section here that deals with the temple service in this future temple. And notice that there's a distinction between what the descendants of Levi can do, and specifically those who are of the line of Phinehas or Zadok. They have a special role in this future temple that's distinct from the other Levites, and the reason for it is related all the way back to Numbers 25. Because when Israel was going apostate, those Levites were going in the wrong direction, and then Phinehas stood up and had zeal for the Lord, and so he gave them this special covenant for the future that reaches all the way into that future time when they will get to serve in a special way, in a special role in this millennial temple. You're like, wow, this is crazy. What is this? So, this is something we have to deal with. Ezekiel's talking about it. Numbers talks about it. It's placed in the future. Here's another place. Here's another passage, just briefly to look at. Psalm 106. Psalm 106. And this is just a mention of it. Psalm 106, verse 28. And it's kind of recounting Israel's history here. 106:28 says, Then they yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor, and ate sacrifices offered to the dead. They provoked Yahweh to anger with their deeds, and a plague broke out among them. Then Phinehas stood up and intervened, and the plague was stayed. And that was counted to him as righteousness from generation to generation. Here, what we want to observe is that this is an everlasting covenant from generation to generation. So once again, it's very similar in language to the covenants of promise, in distinction from the Mosaic covenant. Okay, another passage we want to look at is in Jeremiah 33. Jeremiah 33. And we looked at this before, but Jeremiah 33, essentially in the context of Israel in exile and for disobedience to the Mosaic covenant, there's this section of hope in Jeremiah 30 to 33, and it's actually the context in which Jeremiah unfolds details about the new covenant. And so in the context where he's giving instruction about the new covenant and Israel's future, he has this chapter that reminds Israel of all the covenants of promise that God has made and that he will be faithful to. And so we can see a number of those that come up in this chapter. But what I want us to look at, we could read the whole chapter, we've done that before, but I want you to notice in particular Jeremiah 33, starting in verse 14. And it says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I will fulfill the promise I made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In those days and at that time, I will cause a righteous branch to spring up for David, and he shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will dwell securely. And this is the name by which it will be called. Yahweh is our righteousness. For thus says Yahweh, David shall never lack a man to sit on the throne of the house of Israel. And the Levitical priests shall never lack a man in my presence to offer burnt offerings, to burn grain offerings, and to make sacrifices forever." There's a reference to the priestly covenant. "The word of Yahweh came to Jeremiah. Thus says Yahweh, if you can break my covenant with the day and my covenant with the night, so that day and night will not come at their appointed time, then also my covenant with David, my servant, may be broken, so that he shall not have a son to reign on his throne. And my covenant with the Levitical priests, my ministers, as the hosts of heaven cannot be numbered, and the sands of the sea cannot be measured, so I will multiply the offspring of David, my servant, and the Levitical priests who minister to me." Wow. Okay, so it's reiterated here in a very forceful way in the context of looking to Israel's future salvation and restoration, and it actually links the priestly covenant with the Davidic covenant. And actually that's significant because the one will ensure the other, and it's the Davidic covenant that will ensure the fulfillment of the priestly covenant. Because Jesus, the ultimate Davidic king, will provide the conditions necessary for a temple to be rebuilt, that worship can take place under his authority, and these priests can then serve in that place. And so they're tied together. But notice he connects them both to the Noahic covenant and says, hey, if you can break the Noahic covenant with creation and the stability of nature, then you can break these two. And so he's saying it is perpetual. It goes on. And so it is different than the Mosaic covenant in that way. Another indication that it's not to be equated with the Mosaic covenant. It is separate. Biblical doctrine offers three reasons that this should be viewed as a perpetual covenant separate from the Mosaic. One is the language used in this covenant, which is similar to the covenants of promise, Abrahamic, Davidic, New, and the Noahic, and different from the Mosaic. So it's separated in the language that's used for it. Another reason is that the New Testament portrays the Old Covenant, the Mosaic covenant, as becoming obsolete. 2 Corinthians 3:7, verse 11. And 13, it's passing away. And Hebrews 8, verse 13, calls it obsolete. So what is something obsolete? It becomes unnecessary. And so the Mosaic covenant has been fulfilled in its entirety in the coming of the new covenant. And so the Mosaic covenant is obsolete and passes away, but the priestly covenant remains, and it's even described as being in place in the future millennial kingdom, thus implying that it has not been made obsolete and is not a part of the Mosaic covenant. It's very important. So another reason that we should see it as perpetual and separate from the Mosaic covenant is that it's affirmed alongside the Davidic covenant in Jeremiah 33. And so it's placed in connection there with the Davidic covenant. Commenting on Jeremiah 33, you're going to love this. Charles Feinberg, just some context here. Feinberg was like the guy who discipled and influenced MacArthur. When MacArthur went to seminary, his dad wanted him to go to Talbot because Feinberg was there, and he wanted him to study under Charles Feinberg. And Feinberg knew 15 languages. He was just crazy brilliant. He was a converted Jew, and so he wrote a ton. Well, he writes on this passage in his commentary on Jeremiah, and he says, commenting on Jeremiah 33, he says, "This passage has been a crux interpretum for expositors. It is especially difficult for those who hold an amillennial position in eschatology. The only resort for them is in allegorization of the text or the use of a dual hermeneutic. Simply stated, the passage assures that just as the Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel 7 is guaranteed by God's promise, so is the Levitical priesthood. But whereas the amillennial system can find room for the son of David to reign now and in the future by transferring the earthly throne to the heavenly one at the Father's right hand, it is not so easy to find Levitical priests with their ministrations in the same framework." End quote. So he's just having a little fun as a premillennialist, and saying, hey, how do you deal with this? How do you deal with the plain normal sense of this? But maybe you would say, well, okay, I get what you're saying, but maybe you have a problem with priests serving God after the Mosaic covenant has been fulfilled. Here's a few notes, okay? First, priests were serving or having priestly functions before the Mosaic covenant. Ever think about that? There are individuals who have a priestly function before the Mosaic covenant is instituted. Randall McKinnon writes this: the Pentateuch's depiction of the priests also does not originate first with the giving of the Mosaic covenant. Not only is humanity seen as serving a priestly role in the garden, but also there are priestly activities attributed to the patriarchs, like Abraham, and then Melchizedek. He's a priest. All of this takes place before the giving of the law as part of the covenant at Sinai. So we see that there are priestly function before the giving of the Mosaic covenant, and we see that there is this priestly role after the Mosaic covenant. Now, think about it like this. Okay, Jeremiah is writing, and Ezekiel are writing. So if you think, what are the two major people who describe the detail of the new covenant? I know we haven't covered the new covenant yet, but if you were to say, okay, who deals with the new covenant most in the Old Testament? What two prophets? You would say Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Okay, Jeremiah 33 or 30 to 33, and Ezekiel 36 and 37. And just think about this for a second. If they're under the Mosaic covenant at that time, and they start talking about specifically Ezekiel, he starts talking about the new covenant and how it's going to transform Israel and regenerate them and restore them. And then after that, he introduces these chapters that talk about this future millennial temple where there's sacrifice happening and Israel's restored. Do you think he forgot that he talked about the new covenant? Do you think he forgot that he had just mentioned that there's a new covenant coming that's better and it's going to really replace the Mosaic covenant? Do you think he just forgot about that and he was like, you know what, now let's revert back and go back to the Mosaic covenant for this system? I don't think so. I think we need to give them more credit than we do. Or do you think Jeremiah, in talking about the new covenant coming and the understanding that that was going to fulfill the Mosaic and would be better than the Mosaic, that then he would talk about this priestly covenant as a reverting back to the Mosaic covenant? I don't think so. I think we need to give them better credit than that. So we have its institution in Numbers 25. We have a reference to it in Psalm 106 about it being perpetual, everlasting. We have its mention in Ezekiel in fulfillment, and then we have a reference to its perpetuity in Jeremiah 33. Let me just see here if, let me just reiterate again in the Ezekiel passage, the distinction here. Here's what one writer says: Ezekiel indicates that the only priests who will be permitted to minister in the millennial temple will be those of the line of Zadok in Ezekiel 44 and 48. Non-Zadokian priests will be prohibited from the priestly office because of past idolatrous activity, Ezekiel 44:10. So, I think for a number of these reasons, we ought to consider this covenant to not be just an aspect of the Mosaic covenant, but a completely separate covenant from the Mosaic covenant, and therefore it will be fulfilled in the context of the new covenant. It will be fulfilled in the context of the new covenant after the Mosaic covenant has been completely fulfilled and made obsolete. Here's another observation. Not only are like in the Mosaic covenant, these other priests could still serve, but what we see is in this future time, only the priests of Phinehas will serve, but then also there's a glaring omission. There's a number of glaring omissions in the millennial temple, and one of them is the Day of Atonement. There's other feasts that are celebrated, but no mention of the Day of Atonement. It's like the most significant day in Israel's calendar year. Why would that be? Why would the Day of Atonement be missing? Well, because in that future time, the Day of Atonement will already have been fulfilled in its completeness because the Messiah will have come and died on the cross and fulfilled what the Day of Atonement was pointing towards. He will have dealt with sin. And so it is no longer mentioned. That is a glaring omission from that section of Ezekiel. I want to point out that Ezekiel and the author of Hebrews are not at odds with one another. They are not at odds with one another. The author of Hebrews says the Mosaic covenant has been completely fulfilled. It's obsolete. Ezekiel would agree. And yet, he sees this happening in a future new covenant context. So this is what I want you to note, okay? Actually, if you want more detail on this, look at my survey on Ezekiel. I don't know how many we did, maybe 3. And our last one, we dealt kind of extensively with this question about what do we do with this millennial temple and the sacrifices. But the main takeaway is that the millennial temple worship is not a return to the Mosaic covenant system, but is in a new covenant context. And therefore, the sacrifices in the millennium and the priests in the millennium are not functioning within the Mosaic covenant, but in the new covenant, and therefore, they are not sacrifices for forgiveness of sins. They are for consecration and ceremonial cleansing. And so if you want to look more about that, they deal with clean and unclean, but not the forgiveness of sins. They're dedication to God in different ways. And so you might wonder then, okay, well, what is the sign of this covenant? What is the sign? Well, we're not told explicitly this is the sign, but I think we could infer that the sign of this covenant is the ongoing priestly activities in the future millennial temple. It's their continual sacrifice and activity in the temple. Okay, so, oh boy, that was the interpretation of it, but we had to do some work. These other two we'll cover a little bit more swiftly. The second is the institution or the fulfillment of it. And some of this answers itself for all the detail we've looked at already. Has this covenant already been fulfilled? I want to say, no, I don't think we can argue that. It's still future from Jeremiah and Ezekiel's perspective, and they're talking in a new covenant fulfillment context. And the fullness then of the priestly covenant, in their minds, is viewed as happening during the millennial period that we understand, or the intermediate kingdom. There's the future eternal kingdom, the new heavens, new earth, and this is before that. And so we should think about the fulfillment of this and the full institution of this covenant as occurring in the millennium when Jesus returns again and reigns on the earth. Jesus is now our great high priest after the order of Melchizedek, not in the line of Levi. And this is like the conundrum in the Old Testament. Okay, the Messiah seems to be both king and priest, but how? How can that? You can't be a king from Judah and also be a priest because you have to be from Levi. And so it's solved in that he's after a different order of priesthood. He's after the order of Melchizedek, who actually is a priest that predates the Mosaic covenant. So once again, the whole logic that there can be priests before the Mosaic covenant, and therefore again, there's likely hints that, or not likely, there are hints that this covenant does not have to do with the Mosaic covenant. Okay, I'm just going to keep hammering that. So Psalm 110 presents the Messiah as king and priest. Hebrews chapter 7 elaborates on that, on Jesus being a priest after the order of Melchizedek. So he is not a Zadokian priest. He cannot be a Zadokian priest. And so when we think about fulfillment of this, Jesus cannot be the direct fulfillment of the priestly covenant because he's not from Levi or Phinehas. And that is who this covenant concerns. Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, being from Judah. And so here's something important. I said this in the very beginning in our introduction, that there's a difference between fulfillment in Jesus and fulfillment because of Jesus. And what we meant was some people just look at certain promises, they don't know what to do with, and they go like, Jesus fulfills it. And it just kind of like absorbs into Jesus. But there's not like any tangible fulfillment. There's a difference between saying that and then saying, because of what Jesus does, he ensures all the promises get fulfilled. And so you could think about it like this. Because Jesus is the ultimate Davidic king, he provides the conditions where this covenant can finally be fulfilled. Number one, Israel is regenerated because he brings the new covenant. And number two, he establishes this new temple, and he will provide the conditions then necessary for the Zadokian priest to minister. Okay, so we got that. In the New Testament, then, we learn that all believers in this present age in the church are considered priests before God. 1 Peter 2. Verse 9. And we are priests, a priesthood of God, the priesthood of all believers, we call it. So everyone is a priest, they minister in that way. But in addition, remember that Israel, in the making of the Mosaic covenant, God intended them to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Exodus 19, verse 6, you will be a kingdom of priests. In other words, a ministering nation to the other nations. And yet, of course, they never did that successfully because of their idolatry and their sin. But Isaiah points to a future time when they will fulfill that role. Isaiah 61, verse 6, but you shall be called the priests of Yahweh. they shall speak to you as the ministers of our God. You shall eat the wealth of the nations, and in their glory you shall boast. In verse 21, all right, not 21, there's not 21 chapters in that chapter. Okay. Maybe I miswrote that. So you've got Israel is to be a kingdom of priests, and they will be that in the future when God regenerates them. And so here's how you put it all together. So if you have a nation, God wants one nation to minister to the other nations, like a worship leader. One preacher asked, who leads the nation that leads the nations? And the answer is the Zadokian priests. So you have it like this. You put it, you got Jesus, the ultimate priest king, and then you've got you've got the Zadokian priests who minister in the temple in this special role, and they lead Israel, who's the priestly kingdom of priest nation, who then leads all the other nations in that time period, which all of those people are also priests to God in some sense, because there's the priesthood of all believers. And so you see all the fullness of worship and all the fullness of the concept of priesthood is fulfilled in that millennial period. They all come to pass. It's quite beautiful, quite amazing. And Jesus is the one who ensures all of that. Don't think about it as an either or, but as a both and. I think sometimes we go wrong there. We think like, okay, either Jesus is the ultimate priest and no one else is a priest, or you have the priesthood of all believers in the church, and therefore Israel doesn't matter anymore. What do we do with these Zadokian priests? I don't know. They're the church. So we got to be careful about that. It's both and. We see all of these things taking place at once. And so then, briefly, what are the implications of the priestly covenant? The implications. Number one, it is the importance of faithfulness. Maybe this is lost a little bit when we think about it in all these details, but there's a lesson on the importance of faithfulness even when others are faithless. See, Phinehas is zealous, faithful to the Lord in a time of national apostasy. And what does the Lord do? He rewards him with this covenant. But not only that, it is a covenant that won't be fulfilled for thousands of years into the future. And yet, his descendants will get to serve in a special role to the Lord Jesus and to Israel, the nation, so that they can be a witness nation. They get that special role, and the Levites who were unfaithful, they don't get that role. It's incredible. So the importance of faithfulness, zeal for the Lord's house. Jesus had that zeal. Zeal for your house has eaten me up. We are called to be zealous for good deeds in Titus 2:14. And notice also in the future, this is another millennial context when Israel's restored in Zechariah 13. Notice how similar this is to the zeal that Phinehas had. But this will be true for all of Israel in that day. In Zechariah 13, verse 3. So this is when Israel's restored, and it says, here's a hypothetical, and if anyone, again, prophesies, his father and mother who bore him, the idea is a false prophet, his father and mother who bore him will say to him, you shall not live, for you speak lies in the name of Yahweh. And his father and mother who bore him shall pierce him through when he prophesies. Whoa. So in that future day, when Israel is restored and they are regenerate in the kingdom, if even one of their kids starts having false prophecies, they will spear him through. And what does that remind you of? The zeal of Phinehas. And so he's saying everyone will have this faithfulness to the Lord and zeal for the Lord as a whole in the nation. They will be so zealous that even if one of their family members apostatized, they would slay them. So, the importance of faithfulness. Secondly, the importance of corporate worship. Corporate worship. I just mentioned it, but you have all of these aspects coming to play. When Jesus returns, it says that the branch in Zechariah 6, he will build the temple of Yahweh. And that's not talking about the church. That's talking about a physical structure in Jerusalem. Ezekiel 40 to 48. Even in the Davidic covenant, we'll see that that's what the Davidic king would do. He would build the temple of the Lord in 2 Samuel 7. The nations will celebrate the Feast of Booths in celebration of their deliverance, as well as other feasts. But we see that in Zechariah 14. Even Egypt is coming. It says if they don't come, God withholds rain upon them. So there's nations coming to Jerusalem, streaming to celebrate the Feast of Booths, which signified God's deliverance of his people. And so people are going, let's celebrate God delivered. He brought all of his promises to pass. Peter is looking forward to this in the Mount of Transfiguration in Matthew 19, when he's like, Elijah and Moses are here and the Messiah. And so let's build booths because the kingdom must be here. But he was wrong in his timing a little bit, but he got the idea. And so in this future time, you have, like I said, Jesus as the ultimate priest king. You have the Zadokian priests fulfilling their role, leading Israel, the nation that is a kingdom of priests, who then lead the other nations in worship to Yahweh from Jerusalem, and all of them are priests unto God. And so it all comes together. Abner Chou points out that this covenant shows us worship at every level and how corporate worship matters because it is the goal of history. And so in this time, you see just everyone worshiping in the fullness of what God intended, and it shows it's not just individual worship, it is corporate worship. And so then for us now, we should say, well, God really prizes corporate worship of his people. And he values it so much that it is the goal. It is what is going to take place in all of its aspects. Not only personal, as everyone's a king of priests, but all these corporate dimensions. And so it should be a priority to us. In other words, think about it like this. If all of our years are going to revolve in the future millennium around corporate worship and the times that we go to meet in corporate worship, then shouldn't our weeks now revolve around corporate worship and gathering with the people of God? It should be the highlight as we worship personally through the week and then prepare for that time. So, I think it's also an encouragement that God will fulfill all of his promises, even those that we have forgotten. All the promises are yes and amen in Jesus. He will bring them all to pass. Not one jot or tittle will be forgotten. All will be accomplished because Jesus will ensure that it is all accomplished. And so it's an encouragement as well for what the future holds for us as believers as we worship in that future time. Now, of course, the temple doesn't continue into the eternal state. In the new heavens, new earth, there's no temple. It's explicit about that. And the last reference to priests is in Revelation 20, verse 8, in the context of that future millennial kingdom. And so there are discontinuities in that future time, but in this time where God brings all the covenants of promise to pass, he completes that in the sustained rule for 1,000 years, and then we enter into the eternal state where Christ continues to reign into eternity and us with him. Here's the priestly covenant. Let me pray. Lord, thank you for your great promises to us, even ones we forget, even ones that kind of confuse us and have so many details that we likely still have questions about. And yet I pray that to some degree we've gotten our hands around a little bit of it to appreciate the lessons you have for us here. And even though it's more obscure, less talked about, may it still cause us to worship you and see the importance of corporate worship and how you'll bring all things in your word to pass for your glory and our joy. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, thank you.